Thank you, Esteban, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Weather's great in Austin, so we're all happy to be inside, I'm sure. I'm really looking forward to the next few days, having all my esteemed colleagues and experts in the industry, as all of you are, and I really look forward to having the conversations and networking that we're going to have over the next few days. I think it's exciting times. Esteban talked about digital disruption. There's a lot to talk about there. Traditional sourcing is dead. Traditional sourcing is dead. Has any of you ever hear that? I talked to a lot of you. You're my counterparts. Talked to folks last night in the one-on-ones today, as Esteban said. Where's the pipeline? I'm used to sitting down with you and you go over 6 or 8 deals in the manufacturing space and I make my plans around it and I get all my budget growth planned for. Where's the pipeline? And so the problem we all have is, if we think the pipeline is flat or going away, how do we get the revenue growth that we're expecting? I know my boss is expecting significant growth from me. I suspect all of your bosses are expecting significant growth from you. So I have this vision of what these budget meetings are sounding like as you're going through, it's flat, and they're saying, I need 15%, I need 20%. And so I just have this vision of what's happening.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Everybody wants to know where the money's coming from. If it's not in traditional sourcing, where is it coming from? So I'm going to talk a little bit around the market and the industry, and hopefully I'll be able to answer the question for you, how am I going to grow? And perhaps more importantly, what do you need to do in order to achieve that growth? Last week we had our 64th consecutive ISG index call. There's a lot of people joined, a lot of interest in what's going on in the marketplace these days because the market is evolving very rapidly. And here's what we said last week, and here's what we're seeing. That's not what we're seeing. The as-a-service market is up around 50%. Good news for everybody that's in the as-a-service market. However, the traditional service sourcing market is flat. And we had a somewhat of a slow third quarter. We think it may tick up in the fourth quarter, but other than maybe a few percentage points, the traditional sourcing market is relatively flat. So the question is, why is that? What is actually happening? Can you break it down a little bit for me? So I'll talk a little bit more around what we talked about in the index. The infrastructure as a service market has grown 45%, which is significant. Why is that happening? Well, you all know all of your clients want you to move workloads to the cloud, so that's driving some of the growth. We're also seeing other use cases for infrastructure as a service around hosting IoT applications, analytics, AI type applications. So there's a robust growth market for the infrastructure as a service. And likewise, in the SaaS marketplace, we've seen 30% growth for the last couple of years. So there's a lot of strong growth there. However, if we look at the traditional ITO ACV, think about ADM, infrastructure, network, that sort of thing, it's grown 7% year to date. However, it's all coming from ADM. Lots of ADM deals as clients are starting to figure out what they need to do to modernize their applications going forward. However, infrastructure work is declining fairly significantly, around 10% thus far this year. And of course, most of that is going to the infrastructure as a service platforms. And then the BPO market is also sluggish, which falls into that traditional marketplace. It's down about 10%. We've seen some growth in the Americas and the other regions. It's been down. And we think there's a number of reasons for this. One, of course, is a lot of your business advisory services are getting addressed through RPA. Clients are looking at how can they eliminate work before they look to source it, and there's a lot of activity there. But I think one thing that's very important that we're seeing in this business services marketplace is the emergence of more industry-specific verticalized solutions. You know, there's been a lot of work on the horizontal services, F&A and procurement and HR and so forth, but we're starting to see a lot of vertical industry solutions, which requires that you have very deep domain expertise in those vertical solutions if you want to be able to compete. So we are seeing some shifting in that business services marketplace. Now, what does it look like across industries? Because as with most services, all industries aren't affected in a similar fashion. So here you can see the trailing 3-year trajectory for all of the key industries. And probably doesn't surprise you, BFSI, which is the largest industry, is growing considerably and doing a lot in the digital space. Manufacturing's a little bit different. They're still cost focused, but we're starting to see them emerge into the digital space. And you can kind of see that the trajectory and what's going to happen by industry varies a little bit. We think it'll continue to be lumpy, but it's very important that you understand what's going on in your industry, what is important to them, because that varies by industry, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. What's the outlook? It's nice to know what happened, but what do we think is going to happen go forward? And as you can see here, we think we're going to have continued bullish growth in the overall marketplace, somewhere in the 8 to 9% compound annual growth. I think we would all agree if we could achieve that, we'd feel pretty good about it. But it's worth noting, most of that growth is going to come through the as-a-service market, probably 26% in 19, and you'll see it's kind of lumpy, our forecast going forward. The important thing is to look at the trends. But if you look down at the second column, traditional sourcing, we believe is going to stay flat. Now, that's not entirely a bad story because, as we know, the price points are coming down fairly precipitously, so the volumes are probably up, but your revenue is going to be pretty flat unless you can somehow differentiate yourselves from the other folks in the room today. So we think the market outlook is bullish, but it depends where you're positioning your services, whether you're going to get the growth or not. So what's going on in the service provider community? As all this digital disruption is going on and services are evolving, industries are evolving, what we have seen is a strong proliferation in service providers. What did Esteban call them? The puppies, the digital puppies? We're tracking over 1,200 SaaS providers right now. That's a lot. Almost 300 traditional sourcing providers. A lot of competition. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the demographics of these providers, nearly 71% of the services market is very small in terms of revenue. Same with as a service. 70% are under $30 million in revenue. These companies are small, they're nimble, they're focused on very specific parts of the market, and they're very good at it. We think this means a couple things. One is you need to make sure you know the space, the domain you're talking about, as well as they do, which is difficult. You need to be just as nimble. But secondly, we think this perhaps portends some consolidation may happen as some of the bigger folks look to buy some of the smaller folks to rapidly get that new digital expertise, which is what clients are looking for. Now, most of these smaller providers are not capable and don't have the geographic presence to scale up. They might be able to come in and do a POC around a connected car, but are they going to be able to help a big OEM scale it across all their plants globally? No. But if you're not there at the beginning where these POCs and pilots are happening, will you be there when they want you to help come scale up? That's the question. Or you may have your lunch eaten, as Esteban mentioned. So there's a lot of things going on in the service provider marketplace, and where you're used to competitors coming from 20 or 30 of the usual suspects, there's a lot of unusual suspects out there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So now we're going to shift away from the index and talk a little bit around what we're hearing from our CXOs. What is it they want these days? What do they want service providers to do? It used to be CXOs were all about cost reduction. And particularly when you came out of the recession, it was all about, I need to reduce cost. I've got a large industrial client in the Midwest. they saw revenues go down over 30% and their IT costs went up. That's probably a bad equation, I would think. So they've spent the last few years worried about the cost side of the equation. Now they're worried about business enablement. Cost is always important because you got to fund these new digital capabilities, but it's no longer the top of the list. So what are we hearing from CXOs? I need to improve my speed to market. I need to get new products, new features, new services, whatever it may be, out to my client base quicker than my competitors, so I've got the first mover advantage. They want improved customer experience. Everybody talks about this, no matter what industry you're in. If you're in retail, if you're in healthcare, if you're in manufacturing, they want to improve the customer experience, improve customer loyalty, and get more stickiness from your clients. Data-driven growth. So it's one thing to use some of these new services to get more productive, get higher quality, some of those things, but they really want data-driven growth. How can I move from a product company to a service company, and better yet, a service company that has annuity-based services revenue? That's the holy grail for clients. There's a lot of data running around out there. I've talked to a number of you today. How do you take that data and derive new revenue streams? You walk into a CXO's office and you can tell him how he can grow his top line. You'll get a follow-up meeting. Business outcome focus. Historically, we've had a lot of project focus. We've had some of the standard metrics that we all talk about. Companies want to shift to business outcomes. Again, whether that's increasing services revenue, whether that's improving quality or yield or whatever the metric the industry is looking for, they want to start measuring your success by business outcomes. They don't want to pay you a project and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. They want to track the metrics that apply to the business outcome. And ideally, they'd like to pay for your services on that basis. So imagine you say you're going to go in there and improve the quality of a particular project, and you're only going to get paid if you improve it by a certain percent. Now you've got some skin in the game, and that's what clients want to see. And maybe even co-invest in some of the use cases. So clients want to see some creativity from you guys in terms of how you're approaching some of these new technologies and the use cases. As I said, costs will remain in focus because budgets aren't going up dramatically, so you got to find some dollars to pay for this transformation. So there's always a need to try to drive down the run costs to fund these new digital transformations. And most important, perhaps to the folks in the room, clients are rethinking their vendor portfolio. They come to me and they say, yeah, I know about, and they'll name 5 or 6 of people like you in the room, and then they'll bring up some of these smaller niche companies. What do you know about some of these companies? And we go to our research and we tell them, because they're worried that you guys are so stuck with the technical debt and driving cost out, they're concerned whether you're the right players to help them with their digital disruption. So it's important that you understand there is competition coming from other corners, and you need to act now to ensure that you are just as nimble as they are, you have just as much domain expertise, and you can help them get from where they are to where they want to be. So let's talk about some of the things clients are looking for. Let's look at the cloud delivery model. If you go back a few years ago, most of you in the room, there's lots of data center deals, and there was a lot of concern because clients want to take all their servers to the cloud. And that means reduced revenue for you guys. And so there was a little bit of hesitance to help with that. Well, guess what? If the incumbent isn't willing to do it, somebody else will. And so you have to accept that the public cloud is here to stay. In very few instances can you compete with Google or Amazon or Microsoft or Alibaba or some of these other big cloud providers. You have to accept cannibalization is going to happen. And you need to help clients move to the cloud, despite the fact it might mean some reduced revenue for you. However, it might mean you remain in the customer's ecosystem longer than if you refuse to do it and they find somebody else. So with only the public cloud consistently growing year over year, It's important that you accept that fact and realize your role is going to be around integration and orchestration. It's not going to be around server monitoring and all the things you're used to do. So you need to have your strategy in the infrastructure space focused on integration, orchestration, automation, all those sort of things. And so when you talk to clients, and this is a survey done by another firm, what is it they want help with? Help them build their workload strategy. Help them figure out which workloads to move to the cloud. Help them figure out which cloud is best. Is Amazon best? Is Microsoft best? Is someone else best? Those are the things they want. And then they want you to help them optimize the use of the cloud. I mean, studies indicate that clients are in the cloud, they're spending too much money because they're not using the cloud effectively. Clients need somebody like you folks to solve these problems. They don't want you to support their data centers, they want you to support their cloud deployments. And that's where you need to be in that space. So let's move to speed now. Speed is probably paramount if I had to pick one thing for CXOs. Becoming agile, they're all talking about agile. You can read it in airline magazines. You can see, I saw an ad in the airport around agile. And everybody's doing something with agile, or 97%. However, the majority of those are very low on the maturity scale. They're doing some pilots, they're doing some scrums, they're doing certain things, but they are not mature, and they need help. How do you build a product strategy? How do you bundle your applications? How do you take them to market? How do you support them? Now, the good news is 45% are using Agile and outsourcing. That's the good news. The better news is the same number plan to use more and more and more. But there's challenges with Agile, and they don't tend to be technologies and tools. You guys are all good at technology and tools. Their problems are around cultural issues, and you'll see that in a minute, which is a much more difficult problem. But speed doesn't end with Agile. The next step is helping them get to a DevOps environment where you can integrate your Agile development with the operations for continual deployment and integration. And you show these types of statistics to your clients in terms of code deployments, time to deploy, time to recover, lack of time, you have to back out changes. These are all things clients want. The trick is they don't know how to get there. And you need to help them not just with the tools and technologies, but how to get from here to there. So here are the challenges, and you don't see tools and technology on here. And one of the things when we talk to our clients around deploying new technology or tools or whatever they are, they often tell us, my providers aren't very good at change management. They're pretty good at technology change, but not organizational change. How do I address cultural barriers? How do I deal with process changes and all those sorts of things? So there's always a resistance to change in these types of situations. And the question is, can you differentiate yourself by stepping up and helping them? And I don't know if my friend Randy Gohagen's in the room, but if you guys feel like you can't help them, we're certainly willing to help with the org change in some of these clients. Okay, let's move on to RPA. We did a Bot 3.0 study recently, a few months ago, as a part of an automation event. And we were going to survey 1,000 companies around their maturity journey. Unfortunately, about 60% of those were not qualified to participate in the survey because they have been doing little to nothing in the automation space. And to take the survey, you have to actually be somewhere on the journey. So that took out the first 60%. Of the 300 some odd left, 76% are at the very low end of the maturity scale. Either very little RPA or some POCs, maybe a few in production. They've just started to launch a center of excellence. But most of their qualitative results to the questions we asked were very low. I think some of us think the RPA market is very mature because everybody's talking about it. But if you look at these numbers, that maturity is not quite there. And you can see very small numbers at the high end of the maturity curve, and particularly 7% at the highest level of maturity, where you're automating lots of processes across lots of functions, and maybe you've got cognitive live. I mean, that's what maturity is, and most of our clients and most of your clients aren't there. It varies by industry. Probably not surprising, BFSI is one of the most mature. They've done a lot around automating processes. And they're starting to look at the cognitive space. There's some people that think within the next 2 years, BFSI will run out of processes to automate using RPA. But there's an unlimited number of processes that can be automated using cognitive technologies, where you've got heuristic processes that can't be handled via RPA. That doesn't mean they can't be automated. If you look at healthcare and pharma, the majority are automating fewer than 20 processes, but the interesting thing is they're starting to look at automating some of their front office processes. Pharmacovigilance, managing clinical trial data, managing the front office. These are things that historically compliance would say you can't automate those. We have to have individuals involved. And the reality is, through the automation techniques, you have higher quality, you have higher compliance, and oh, by the way, lower cost. And then if you look at retail, the interesting there, they've done some of the automation and IT and finance and some of those things, but they're twice as much more likely to be automating supply chain. I've got a shoe company in the Midwest, and we met with them many times and talk about sourcing and cost takeout, and every time they would say, but supply chain is my problem. I got to get shoes to the stores. I got to meet supply and demand. So there's a lot of opportunity for automation beyond your standard horizontal processes. And different industries are focused in different areas, and you need to understand that so you can focus on the real problems that they have. Clients typically hit the wall somewhere around their automation journey. They get a few processes automated, and then they don't know what to do next. They don't know about building COEs and figuring out how to build governance structures and all those sort of things. So they initially hit that wall, and they need help getting over that wall. They need help with organizational change management and all these other things. And then finally, they need to realize, once you hit the RPA wall, whether that's 2 years out or 4 years out, that cognitive capability is out there, and you need to start thinking about that, or your competitors are going to hit cognitive before you, and you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. RPA and automation is a journey, starting with RPA, moving to cognizant, artificial intelligence, and the like, and clients need help getting there. So what does automation mean? Well, let's talk about the size of automation first. We think the marketplace for software is roughly 450 million, lots of suppliers out there. But we think the services side is about 3 to 4 times that. And we think those numbers are going to continue to grow 20 to 30% a year for the foreseeable future. So this is a healthy, growing marketplace. Although, as I mentioned yesterday, we think there's likely some consolidation in the future. We think some of the big enterprise software companies, whether it's SAP or Microsoft or Oracle or Salesforce, are likely to acquire some of the smaller ones. And we're also seeing some of the leading RPA providers actually building up war chests. They're getting funding, which we believe because they want to go buy the smaller companies, because we think consolidation is the future. So beware of consolidation coming in the RPA marketplace. What does it all mean to sourcing? Well, this isn't necessarily the story you want to hear. As a part of this study, a very large percent plan on reducing their use of outsourcing in favor of RPA. You know, clients think outsourcing was all about offshoring and labor arbitrage and all those things to reduce costs. They think they can do all those things through automation, and many of them are doing it. Part of the reason for that is the second piece of the puzzle, which is more than half of the respondents says their service providers aren't incorporating RPA fast enough. Now, some of them think you're doing RPA, but putting all the windfalls into your pocket and not giving it back to the client. And one of the things we always talk about is when it comes time for a deal to be renewed, what happens to the incumbent? And we always say, As long as you've been innovating and innovating, you're likely to stay there. But most clients say the biggest issue I have with service providers is they're not innovating. They give the new logo all the new cool stuff, and they never bring the good stuff to me as an incumbent because it'll cannibalize their revenue. Well, what we used to see is at the time of renewal, incumbents would retain their business 75% of the time. That's pretty good. That has flipped. Now what we're seeing is at the time of renewal, 75% of suppliers are losing all or some chunk of their revenue. Now, I don't know about you guys, I'd rather take a 20% haircut on price than losing the whole deal. And a lot of it is because they don't feel like you're doing all you can to bring the new technology and deploy it within the environment. And maybe even more troubling is this statistic. In the next 3 years, they plan to repatriate a good chunk of the work they currently have offshore and build bots themselves. So the message here is if you are not bringing RPA to your clients aggressively and proactively, they're going to do it themselves, one way or the other. So there's a lot of risk here in terms of what you're doing, not just with new logos and beating out the competition, but retaining the revenue that you already have. Very critical. Okay, the last subject I want to cover is the Internet of Things. A lot of buzz around the Internet of Things. IoT adoption, in our experience, is growing, but perhaps a little more slowly than people may realize. You can see along the left here, there's a lot of key use cases for IoT. We talk about smart cities, connected industry, right? Everybody talks about smart factories, digital factories, Industry 4.0, a lot of activity there. Smart buildings, a lot of activity there. Connected cars, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but if any of you are working with the OEMs, there's a ton of activity going on with connected cars and going on down to like smart agriculture. You talk about creating new revenue. John Deere is out there not only with their tractors and they've connected them and they're doing all the fleet management types of good stuff you can do with IoT, but they've taken it beyond that. They're putting sensors in the ground. Check acidity levels, check water levels, all those things in the ground, and then they're selling that data out to the seed companies. Totally new revenue stream. Who would have thought? And there's examples like that all over the place. So that's a perfect example of, yeah, it's nice to connect your fleet. All the industrial manufacturers are doing it, all the cars are doing it, but new revenue streams completely around the ecosystem you're working in. That's the nirvana that other companies are looking for. And if you look at the numbers on the right, this happens to be a source from McKinsey. Everybody's got a view on what the market is. They're all wrong, but the reality is it's big. Whatever the number is, it's big. And so you want to talk about a source of growth, this is where it is. But it's not that simple. Very few people can go into a large enterprise and solve all of their IoT problems. First of all, the companies can't afford it because it would cost $1 zillion. And secondly, the time to do it would take too long and the investment would be too great. So the important thing is to figure out how to piece up the problem IoT is there to solve, identify the use cases you want to attack, whether it's improving visibility, improving productivity, improving quality, whatever, there's 1,000 use cases out there just in digital factories alone, as an example. You got to get focused on those. And let me give you the example here of the connected car. We always talk about the connected car. It's cool technology, right? All kinds of things with telematics and over-the-air software updates and all that kind of good stuff. That's a technology problem. What we want to talk about is the connected customer. The companies that are being successful understand the customer journey for somebody wanting a vehicle. Now, first of all, it used to be, what's the body look like? How much horsepower do I have? Buyers don't care about that stuff anymore. They want to know what's all the goodies that are in the car. Infotainment systems, mobility, location services, financial services. How can I change how I buy cars? Look at how people are buying cars now. You can use virtual reality. Go look at cars virtually, change the features, kind of virtually test drive them. put in an order, and by the time you get to the dealership, you're just closing the deal. You no longer have to deal with this going from dealer to dealer to dealer, and of course, that's a miserable experience for everybody. Online channels. People want to buy stuff from the car. And how about the data coming from the car? Starbucks wants you to know in your car, there's a Starbucks a mile away. Please pull in, and oh, by the way, we got a special on pumpkin lattes. So there's a lot of opportunity in this ecosystem, and it is not one that one provider can solve. You got to figure out where you want to be in this space, what use cases you want to focus on, and then how are you going to differentiate yourself from all the competitors. The number of suppliers that are entering the connected car market is incredible. In the last 12 months, venture capitalists have put out billions of dollars, I think $4 to $5 billion, whatever you want to believe, in 100 deals. And the OEMs are looking at all these guys because they want to have the new features and functions before the competitors. And it's creating interesting bedfellows, right? Who would have thought Honda would be investing in Cruise, which is GM's business for connected and autonomous cars? FCA working with BMW. You got Apple, you got Google, you got Amazon wanting to put Alexa in all the cars. You got to figure out where to play all that. And the new competitors, I mean, everybody know Delphi, they spun off Aptiv, right? Because they wanted to have a separate company focused purely on software, purely around connected cars, partly because building powertrains does not attract cool talent. Writing software for connected cars attracts cool talent, and it increases your valuation. So Aptiv has got a autonomous connected car activity going in Las Vegas, I believe it is. Who's running that for them? Hertz. Hertz figured out a couple years ago the rental car business is going to change, and now they want to be a mobility company. And they've partnered with Aptiv to actually manage these autonomous car trials that they're doing out of Las Vegas. So you used to know who your competitors were, and that landscape is changing quicker than I know I can keep track of. So you got to keep your eyes out. Where is the competition coming from, and can you compete with that? And again, we think that's going to lead to consolidation as well. So what does it mean by industry? So you can see here's all the key industries on the bottom. And again, forget the numbers. The trend is huge for basically every industry that you serve, that we serve. So the opportunity is significant, but you have to focus on use cases. You can't pilot connected car. You got to pilot a piece of the puzzle and then scale it up. So it's got to be an agile deployment of new capability over time. You can't boil the ocean. You got to make sure you measure the business value. So if you think you're going to have some business value based on the POC, you got to be able to track that business value. You got to have the metrics. Analytics and data science. Basically, nothing you can do with IoT works if you don't have a good analytics program with good algorithms and strong data science. And this is leading to some interesting things, too. I've got a client in Florida that's partnering with University of Florida around analytics. I've got a client in Pennsylvania. They're partnering with Carnegie Mellon around data science and analytics. They could be partnering with you guys. So it's all who's got the interesting story to solve the data science problem, because that's a capability that's in high demand and short supply. So they're looking for solutions to that problem. And they're always interested in somebody that's willing to co-invest. So some of this stuff costs a lot of money, and if you're willing to co-invest, put some skin in the game. They're very interested in hearing that story. But again, don't forget culture and scaling challenges. As I said, the reason adoption of IoT isn't growing quicker, because it's easy to build a POC. It's hard to take that POC and scale it across the enterprise. So if you can solve that problem, you're going to have a lot of interested customers. Okay, so let's look ahead. What do we think this means to you guys going forward? What are the key takeaways? First of all, nobody wants to hear it. You got to be prepared to cannibalize your existing business if you want to grow your relationship somewhere else with a client. And the part of the problem here is every account executive gets measured on growth. Maybe they ought to be measured on retention instead of growth. That's one problem. Again, cloud is the perfect use case for this. You got to accept that the public cloud is going to win the data center business. You got to focus on integration and orchestration. Clients don't want to talk about technology. They want to talk about solutions. And in particular, vertical solutions with specific business outcomes. I don't want to talk about application availability. I don't want to talk about incident response time. I want to hear about how you're going to improve my business results. And in order to do that, you got to be able to help the clients build a business case. Sometimes these use cases are expensive, and they do not know how to go to their board and say, I need however many $1 million in investment, and here's going to be the downstream impact, and be able to track those business cases. We hear that all the time from clients. It's one thing to build a POC with a digital factory. It's another thing to take 20 brownfield environments, which have old equipment, and then figure out how to put that in there. That's very difficult. Adoption and scaling, as I've mentioned, this is critical. And culture and change management. I had a client, same client in Florida, came to me and said, you know, we've got this smart factory thing going on. I'm like, cool. And started talking about technology and all these sort of things, sensors and predictive analytics and all the, they said, no. We know how to do all that. We don't know how to get all of our plants to work together to accept new business processes and new tools and new technologies. The technology is easy. There's lots of people that can do it, and most of them are in this room. But if you can't solve the culture and change management problem, then all the investment in the technology is for naught. New digital providers are emerging, the digital puppies. They're small, they're nimble, they don't have any technical debt. That's tough competition to deal with. But if you don't figure out how to deal with it, if you don't evolve into becoming a digital company in the face of a flat traditional sourcing market, your future is at risk. So show me the money. Where's the money? How am I going to get my revenue growth? The money's in digital. You got to focus on business enablement. You got to help with speed to market. You got to solve the customer experience. And if you can figure out how to help companies with data-driven growth, annuity-based service revenue, you're going to have a client for life. Thank you very much for your time.